Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be reviewing what the Israeli settlers in the West Bank think and how they think. So we want to look at their perspective. And remember, when we are looking at the perspective of these Israeli settlers in the West Bank, remember they are stealing people's homes and they are protected by the Israeli Defense Force, also called the Israeli Occupation Force. So let's start off here. Okay, so for decades, Daniela Weiss has been one of the leaders of Israel's settlement movement. Weiss became involved in settlement politics in the wake of the 1967 war. In the early 70s, her family moved to the settlement in the West Bank, and she later served for a decade as mayor of Kedumim, a community in the north. She has also been arrested numerous times, including for assaulting a police officer and interfering with an investigation into the destruction of Palestinian property. More recently, she has been affiliated with the Nechala Settlement Organization, which helps younger settlers establish illegal outposts in the West Bank, an initiative that's controversial even among the settler community. Weiss is a neighbor and an ally of Bezalel Smotrich, the extremist minister of finance, who has said that the Palestinian people do not exist and that the Palestinian communities need to be erased. He also lives in Kedumim. Okay, so this right here, this is genocidal rhetoric from the minister of finance, saying they do not exist and they need to be erased. And this is just allowed. This is literally the minister of finance. You're rewarded. You're given, hey, we have a minister of finance position open. Who do we want to give it to? Oh, why not that genocidal guy? Which genocidal guy? Everyone in Israel is genocidal. That's what's going on in Israel right now. Weiss and I recently spoke by phone. So this is the interviewer, Isaac Trotner. And remember, this is the article, The Extreme Ambitions of West Bank Settlers in the New Yorker. Okay, so let's see what he has to say. Weiss and I recently spoke by phone since the Hamas massacre of October 7th, Benjamin Netanyahu's government, in addition to invading Gaza, has with its allies in the settler movement become increasingly aggressive in the West Bank. Okay, so people reiterate this over and over again on Twitter, which is that the West Bank does not have Hamas. And so if this genocide is in retaliation for Hamas, then there would be no reason to murder people in the West Bank because Hamas is not in the West Bank. However, if this genocide that's going on of the Palestinians is to genocide the Palestinians, which is what's going on, then obviously you would attack both Gaza and the West Bank. And so that's what we're seeing. So all you have to do is follow the evidence. Don't listen to the Zionist propaganda. I know my boomer viewers love to listen to Zionist propaganda. You've been listening to it your entire life, but for the rest of us who are not completely brainwashed, this is what's going on. It's not about attacking Hamas. It's not about getting the hostages. It is entirely about wiping out the Palestinians. So the article goes on to say 16 Palestinian communities have been removed from their land and 175 Palestinians have been killed. I wanted to talk to Weiss to understand the extremism of the settler movement and her ultimate intentions for the West Bank. During our conversation, edited for length and clarity, we also discussed how her religious attitudes shape her view of the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, why human rights should not be considered... Okay, wow. Why human rights should not be considered universal, and why she should not be expected to mourn the dead for dead Palestinian children. All right, well, this is going to be a very spicy article. And remember, this is someone who has the same beliefs as the Minister of Finance. So this is obviously government endorsed. The Israeli occupying force supports them, defends them. So let's read what they have to say here. Okay, so she says, I was born in Israel in 1945, 3 years before the birth of the modern Jewish state. I was born in the Tel Aviv area. The interviewer says, and your parents? My father was born in the United States. My mother was born in Warsaw, Poland, and she immigrated with her parents to Israel when she was a year old. So she came to Israel many years before the state of Israel was born. Okay. So neither of these people are native to Palestine. and they go there and take the homes of the Palestinians. Who invited them there? Remember, she was born there before Israel existed. So she was born into Palestine, and she became a subversive element within the country in order to overthrow Palestine. Does that sound familiar? Of course, Zionists do that everywhere. Okay, so the interviewer goes on to say, how would you describe the settler movement? She says, I see the settler movement today as a direct continuation of the settler movement of 120, 30, 40 years ago. I see it as a chapter in the history of Zionism. We're in one of those chapters of modern Zionism. Settlement is the way to return to Zion. So the interviewer says, settlement is the way to return to Zion. She responds, yes, it's the end of the dispersion and the beginning of the revival of the Jewish nation in its homeland. Interviewer, what are the borders of that Jewish nation? Okay, so this is going to be really spicy probably. The borders of the homeland of the Jews are the Euphrates in the east and the Nile in the southwest. So this would, the author of this says, this would include the territory of multiple Middle Eastern countries, as well as the territory that Israel controls today. Okay, so yes, that is considered to be the greater Israel area, and the United States has been trying to destabilize the countries that control that area, because the United States is the attack dog for Israel. And so they've destabilized these countries so Israel would have an easier time taking over the territory of greater Israel. So when you're wondering, why did America kill a ton of people all across the Middle East? It's to create greater Israel for its Zionist banker masters. So the interviewer goes on, there's a Palestinian slogan that's become very controversial, from the river to the sea, which means from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. It's controversial because it would include all the land that currently make up Israel, but you're saying from the river to the... Oh, she interrupts. What is controversial? Palestinians sometimes use the slogan from the river to the sea, but what you're saying is that from the river to the Nile is the Jewish homeland, correct? Okay, so the interviewee says, of course, if someone decides to invent a new religion today, who will decide the rules? First nation that got the word from God, the promise from God, the first nation is the one who has the right to it all. The others that follow, Christianity and Islam, with their demands, with their perceptions, they're imitating what existed already. So why in Israel? They could be anywhere in the world. They came after us in the double sense of the word. Okay, so this person who was born in Palestine and her parents immigrated from other parts of the world says that this is her rightful land and she can take it from the Palestinians. This is insane talk, obviously. The interviewer goes on to say, when did you first get involved in the settler movement? She says, in 1967, in the Six-Day War. The Six-Day War was such a miracle and aroused very deep feelings towards the birthplace of our nation. Hebron, Shiloh, Jericho, Nablus, and because of the miracle of the war, we had this spiritual sensation that something happened in the dimensions of a biblical sense. I felt that I wanted to be an active part in this miraculous happening. My husband didn't like the idea of moving from Tel Aviv to the mountains of Judea and Samaria. He liked our life near Tel Aviv, but then when the Yom Kippur War broke out in 1973, I became involved in a very intensive way, and so did my husband. We became part of the settlement movement of Gush Emunin, the movement that established communities in Judea and Samaria. I forced my husband to follow me and our two daughters, they were little ones, to a tiny tent on the mountains of Samaria, where we all live today. Now we have a big family with 4 generations. My mother-in-law came with us, and then we have our daughters and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They're all settlers in Samaria. So the interviewer asks, in a lot of these places where settlements have been developed from 1967 to the present, there have been Palestinian communities and Palestinian families. What is your feeling about where these people should go? She says it's the opposite. None of the communities in Judea and Samaria are founded on an Arab place or property, and whoever says this is a liar. I wonder why you said it. Why did you say that? Since you have no idea about the real facts of history, that's not true. The opposite is true. Who got this idea in your mind? Okay, so she is clearly unstable. She just got done talking about how she was born in Palestine, not Israel, which didn't exist yet, and how her parents were from Poland and the United States. And she's saying that this... Anyways, she's wild. So let's see what the interviewer has to say. Palestinian communities have been removed from their land, kicked off their land by... No, you never read things like that. No, there are no pictures. According to... Okay, so the author says, according to a report by B'Tselem, an Israeli human rights group, parts of Kedemin, where Weiss lives, were built on private Palestinian land. In 2006, Peace Now found that Privately owned Palestinian land comprised nearly 40% of the territory of the West Bank settlements and outposts. So just wild what is going on there. Is that the end of it? Oh, I guess that's not the end of it. Why is it not showing me the entire article? Hold on a second. I'm going to try something else. All right, let's see if this did not work either. Palestinian communities have been removed from their land, kicked out their land. Is that the end of it? It doesn't seem like it. Whoops. All right, let me see if there's a way for me to make this more easily accessible to you. Okay, I'm gonna change my screen a little bit to make this easier on you. Ta-da! I wish I could get this in a darker color, but we're just gonna have to continue on like this. Okay, so the interviewer says, okay, I'm a little surprised you're denying this. I thought you were going to say it's okay to kick Palestinians off land because it belongs to the Jewish people. So the interviewee says, you did no homework before you interviewed me. Everything you say is the opposite of my personality and my philosophy. You're interviewing a personality and you don't know anything about them. It's very strange. I've never encountered a situation like this. Okay, she belongs in a mental hospital, but I would say that for the majority of Zionists. So this is interesting. Let's see what the interviewer says. I was trying to understand where Palestinians who live in the West Bank should go. She says, why should they go? Why should they go? I don't know what she's talking about here. The interviewer says they should stay where they are, you're saying? Okay, she says they should accept the fact that in the land of Israel, there's only one sovereign. This is the issue. So let's not confuse things. We the Jews are the sovereigns in the state of Israel and in the land of Israel. They have to accept it. Okay, so she takes their land and says they have to stay there essentially as slaves. They're second-class citizens. They have no rights. So the interviewer says if they accept it, should they receive full voting rights and things like that? Okay, so he knows where she's going to go with this. So she says in the state of Israel, they have the right to vote for the Knesset because Ben-Gurion gave them this right. He trusted them. And even if he didn't trust them, he didn't have much of a choice. 3 years after the Holocaust, he wanted to have a state for the Jews, and he knew there were big problems with the issue of voting. But in the 75 years since independence, the Arabs in the state of Israel and the Arab members of the Knesset showed in every possible way that their idea is to establish a Palestinian state. They are not working for the interests of the state of Israel. So she goes on to say, so I think the Arabs in Judea and Samaria have no right to ask for rights or take part in elections for the Knesset. Okay, so that's what I talked about. They're just going to be slaves there. They lost their right to vote for the Knesset. They will never get this right. They will have their own Palestinian authority where they can run their civilian affairs in a logical way, but not as a member of the Knesset. No, no, no. Okay, so when she talks about running civilian affairs, what she really means is that they're not going to have control over things like their foreign policy or imports, exports. It's going to be all controlled by the Israelis. And really, the only thing the Palestinian Authority is going to control is like they're going to be responsible for any attacks on Israel. And so they're going to be blamed for it. It's just ridiculous. So the interviewer goes on to say, so rights are not some sort of universal thing that every person has. There's something that you can win or lose. And she says that's right. So very clearly insane individual that this interviewer is dealing with, and she's like openly insane, and she's supported by the current government of Israel. The interviewer goes on, you've been part of the settlement movement during a lot of different governments. How do you feel that the current government of the past year has been treating settlers broadly compared to with past governments? She says, I will say that it's better under Netanyahu. It doesn't satisfy my ambitions and my dreams, my plans, but there are 800,000 Jews or settlers if you want. So this gives me a lot of encouragement that from 800,000, we will become 2 million, then 3 million, etc. Okay, so she says that the current government is doing a good job of helping these psychopaths. The interviewer goes on to say, when you say that the government's been better, but it hasn't realized your dreams, what are those dreams? 2 million Jews in Judea and Samaria, more settlements, more farms, bigger cities. She goes on. The interviewer goes on to say, when you say that you want more Jews in the West Bank, is your idea that the Palestinians there and the Jews will live side by side as friends, or that? Okay, so she goes on to say, if they accept our sovereignty, they can live here. So yeah, she's just a Jewish supremacist, a Zionist supremacist. The interviewer goes on to say, so they should accept the sovereign power, but that doesn't necessarily mean having rights. It just means accepting the sovereign power. And she says, right, no, I'm saying specifically that they're not going to have the right to vote for the Knesset. No, no, no. The interviewer goes on to say, can you talk about the settlement outpost movement, your role in that, especially with young people that you've served as somewhat of an inspiration for? Okay, so she says a post is a basis for a bigger community. That's the name of the game. So they're just taking over everything in the West Bank. That's their plan. The interviewer goes on, why is that controversial, even among some settlers? She says, I don't know that it's controversial. Some might not know the process. And people say to me, I want you to build a new settlement that would be as nice as the older ones that we see. She says to them, it was a place with one family and now hundreds of families. So this is how it started. In Israel, there's a lot of support for settlements. And this is why there have been right-wing governments for so many years. The world, especially the United States, thinks there's an option for a Palestinian state. And if we continue to build communities, then we block the option for a Palestinian state. We want to close the option for a Palestinian state, and the world wants to leave the option open. And it's a very simple thing to understand. Okay, so she's blatantly saying genocide. They're wiping out this state, and the only people who are going to be allowed to exist, the only Palestinians, the only Arabs allowed to exist there afterwards, are Arabs who accept not having voting rights, being second-class citizens, and the dominance of Israel. So just wild, wild, wild. And it's shocking how many Christians will support this type of thing. This is modern day Zionism. The interviewer goes on to say, when Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005, it also closed down settlements in the region. This was under the Sharon government, and there's been talk by some settlers since October 7th about the need to repopulate Gaza with settlements. What are your feelings about what should happen with Gaza? She says, right now I'm on my way to a TV interview where I'm going to speak about our movement's efforts to return to Gaza, the entire Gaza, and build settlements. Okay, so they're planning on wiping out Gaza just like they're planning on wiping out the West Bank. So, and they have support by the government, which I will emphasize over and over again. So the interviewer says, so you think it was a mistake to pull out settlements nearly 20 years ago? She says it was a mistake. The whole world is crying now because of that. The whole world suffers from Hamas's rise. No, I think the whole world suffers because of Zionism. She says, not my problem. It's your problem. No country in the world says they were going to accept even 1,000 people from Gaza. The world hates them. Such a big mistake to let them rise. That's heinous because the Palestinians are mostly children. And the reason people are trying not to take them, such as Egypt or Jordan, is because when you're displacing these large amounts of population, a lot of people are going to die, and they already have very large refugee populations. Jordan has millions of people, and if you displace them like this, you're not going to give them back their lands. And so they want a different solution aside from just displacing the entire population. It's not saying that the majority of these people who are children, mostly children, are evil people, which is what she's saying. So just horrific, horrific talk by this settler. Interviewer says, where should the Palestinians in Gaza go? She says, to Sinai, to Egypt, to Turkey. Again, there's already millions of refugees in all those countries. The interviewer says, they're not Egyptians or Turkish, though. Why would they go to Turkey? She says, okay, the Ukrainians are not French, but when the war started, they went to many countries. And the interviewer says their country is being bombed and so many of them fled west. She says in Gaza, people are dying to go to other places. The interviewer says, I think Ukrainians want to go to Europe because they didn't want to get bombed. And she says, and the Gaza people want to get bombed by us? Okay, so she's coming right on saying it, that they're just planning on bombing the civilian population. The interviewer goes on, maybe one option rather than bombing them would be to help them try and develop a society for them in Gaza, right? And she says, okay, I wish you luck. Go ahead, go for it, because she's going to just colonize them anyways. So what does she care if this interviewer does that? Okay, so the interviewer goes on to say, do you feel that Netanyahu and the people in his government are sympathetic to you and your cause? And she says he's very sympathetic, but he's not as brave as we are. Okay, so he goes on to say, what about Smotrich and people like him? So that's the minister of finance that is living nearby. They are brave, but the settlers themselves, which I represent in my movement, are more brave than them. Smotrich is also a settler. Okay. The interviewer goes on to say, we saw some horrible images on October 7th of what happened to Israeli children. Now we see some horrible images of Gaza, of what is happening to Palestinian children. When you see Palestinian children dying, what's your emotional reaction as a human being? Okay, so first of all, the Israeli ministry, the Israeli government has released the data, and there has been no people, no children 0 to 3 years old who died on October 7th from the Hamas attack. And there were very minimal who died under the age of 18. And of those, we have no idea about how many of them were from crossfire or from the Israelis attacking everything that moved. So it's looking pretty bad here. When it comes to casualty rates, civilian casualty rates, it looks like Hamas is far more humane than the Israeli occupation force. So let's see what her answer is, though. I go by a very basic human law of nature. My children are prior to the children of the enemy, period. They are first. My children are first. Okay, so doesn't care about these other children, obviously. Final question. We are talking about children. I don't know if the law of nature is what we need to be looking at here. And then she says, yeah, I say my children are first. So this is the type of rhetoric that we're dealing with. This is the extreme ambitions of the West Bank settlers by Isaac Chotiner on the New Yorker. I would encourage you to go give this a click, give this a view. This is a very interesting thing to read, to see just what these types of people believe in, what the settlers, what the Israelis in general, because the government obviously supports this, believe in. So if you enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up. Please subscribe to our channel for more content on YouTube and Rumble. Leave us a comment in the comment box below, questions, concerns, critiques you might have. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.